joining us now. We're very pleased to have back with us Reverend Osagyefo Uhuru Sekou, who is a Freeman Fellow with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He is pastor for formation and justice at the First Baptist Church in Jamaica Plain. He is down there in Ferguson, and certainly has been. He was born and attended high school in St. Louis, Missouri. So Ferguson is his home territory, and he joins us once again on the Zero Hour. Reverend Sekou, thanks so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be back with you, dear brother. Thank you for keeping alive the best of the tradition of the Fourth Estate.
Thank you, sir, so much. And first, before we get any further, I heard you were having some health problems, and I'd like to know, are you well? We're certainly thinking of you, praying for you. How are you?
I am well, running from the police and tear gas for 3 or 4 nights in a row in what we call church shoes is not the best ideal and the best thing for your back. No,
it's not, and certainly we wish you a speedy recovery from that. And I'll just start by saying I spent a little bit of time as a musician backing up church choirs, and I do recall a song about traveling shoes. Maybe we ought to get you a pair.
I did. I got me a pair of old beat-up New Balance, so I got me a pair of traveling shoes.
All right, good. That's good. That's good news. And now I do want to talk to you, Reverend Sekou, about you've been working with, you've worked with young people and you've been down there. And, one of the things I think people struggle with in Ferguson is even those of us who I think our hearts are in the right place and we recognize it's an injustice and we recognize that something must be done. But I feel as if the country needs a moral framework, moral guidance, moral context for what's going on here. And I feel that as this situation extends, how do we help people understand what the framework for justice needs to be in a situation like Ferguson?
Well, I think the framework of justice is the same framework of justice that we've always wrestled with inside the American empire, particularly for those people of African descent who have essentially kept America on life support, kept it alive in various ways over the past since I'd sojourned into this place. And so one of the moral frameworks that emerges for me out of my narrow Christian context is the least of these. Such what you have done unto the least of these, so you have done it unto me. When I was hungry, you fed me not. When I was naked, you clothed me not. When I was in prison, you visited me not. And so at this moment when black youth have some of the highest unemployment rates in the country and where African Americans have been in a perpetual state of economic depression for the past 5 decades, combined with in Ferguson, Missouri, there's been a doubling of unemployment from 2000 to 2012. The median income is $36,000, and 1 in 4 people live in poverty, and people, and all of them are struggling to make a dollar out of 15 cents. It is the unfinished business of Dr. King, that great moral vision that was given to us through the people he struggled alongside. And so as a result of that, we find ourselves in a situation where we must be able to keep track of the misery of everyday people and highlight their suffering and their misery, and that what is happening with us now in what we see happening in Ferguson now is a reflection of a deeply problematic and amoral framework. And so part of that moral vision is, how do we get people access to a decent and living wage? How do we beat back the various forms of police abuse? Question that the murder of Mike Brown reflected to us. And so part of that moral framework includes an economic just one, as well as a demilitarization of American police forces.
And you use that phrase, amoral framework, that there is an amoral framework which would preserve situations like that in Ferguson, and occasionally erupts in the kind of police militarization behavior we've seen there. And I would ask you, I guess my observation, yes, it's amoral. I would also argue that except for a tiny, tiny percentage of the population, you might call the oligarchy or whatever, it's also an illusion for the white community. And I mean, it was something I wanted to get your thoughts. I was talking about it in the monologue. I think there's this illusion among, let's say, middle class white people, even relatively prosperous white people or people of any ethnicity that get a little bit of money, that somehow that's not us. That's somebody else. But when you have a society where there's so much economic injustice, where there's such a lack of opportunity, a house divided cannot stand. And so I'm just struggling here for a way. I'm asking you for guidance here for how can I even tell people who might think that it's somebody else who's suffering and dying on the streets of Ferguson that no, that's you, and that if you distance yourself from that moral struggle, you're not only being amoral, but in the long run, you're going to harm yourself.
Well, I think part of that understanding of what a moral framework looks like and the contradictions that white brothers and sisters are undergoing is a has to do with what W. E. Du Bois in his text Black Reconstruction, published at the turn of the century, argues that there is a psychological wage of whiteness. And so even though white brothers and sisters are catching hell, many of them still do not fully understand or benefit rather from the psychological wages of whiteness, in that they do not see them, even though they are poor, they are suffering, they don't vote in their best interest, and at least they are not niggas. So it is just not simply about white elites not understanding. It is about a nation that is not understanding. It has created a level of public policy that has been malformed and ultimately not in the best interest of the nation. And so it is getting beyond that psychological wage of whiteness. This is not an insurmountable task. There are great white brothers and sisters who have done that, like yourself and many, many others. Viola Lazo, who laid her life down in Selma, Alabama, the late Will Campbell. I mean, there's a tradition of white folks who've been able to see beyond the psychological wages of whiteness and find access to something greater than that as a moral framework. And then, the reality is, if we take something like Occupy, right, one way, almost glib way I've understood Occupy is to understand it as white folks have figured out that the system don't even work for them.
Well, I think that's right, and this gets back to this theme of a system that's really not is only working for the very very few right now, and the idea that if I want to make the choice to listen to Fox News and be convinced that Clive and Bundy is my hero, and the people in Ferguson are just somebody that I need to call out the army to protect me from, that in the end I'm not only forsaking my responsibility as a moral citizen of this country and of the world, but I am also economically and socially shooting myself in the foot, aren't I?
Well, I think it is more fundamental than that. It's not just simply shooting oneself in the foot. It is also a reality of of moral injury, if you will, that white brothers and sisters are going through, and being able to create a kind, not necessarily empathy. And we're just not simply talking about individual white folks, right? We're talking about a system, a set of economic arrangements that facilitate various forms of alienation and isolation. And so it's just not about individual white people, but more about the ways in which a system of government, which, if you look at the passage of, say, the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act, 64 and 65, respectively, if you took a national poll on those issues, the majority of white brothers and sisters wouldn't have supported it. So it's the question of a kind of prophetic few who are willing to seize public imagination, transform, and at their best transform public policy. And so it's about a system and those who feel called. Now, I am not a vanguardist. I don't know who those people are. I don't know what their class standing in. I think they'll be multi-class, multiracial, multi-gendered, will come to make America be to what it's been called to be. But I do know that something has to change, and that perhaps Ferguson and that the blood of Michael Brown has watered the soil for potential transformation of America.
Well, beautifully said, and we're going to, if that's all right with you, we'll take a quick break to just talk for a few minutes more. We're talking with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou in Ferguson. This is Richard RJ Eskow. We'll be right back after this. This is the Zero Hour. And we are back on the Zero Hour talking with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou about the situation in Ferguson and about the context, the moral context. But let's just take a break, if we might, for a moment and talk about, Reverend Sekou, what is your read of the situation there, the mood there? I know we've had the Attorney General there since you and I spoke last. We've got next week, we're looking forward to perhaps the release of the grand jury report and so on. How do you feel things are right there now?
I think we are really. We are in a fit struggle. Highly militarized forces on the street, and young people who will not back down. They should be celebrated and honored. Their behavior. There's been a lot of emphasis on the small acts of violence. People talk about the property attacks on property as though it is more important than the attack on Michael Brown and the attack on civil liberties, the attack on freedom of the press, and the attack on the right to assembly. So there are several attacks that are going on and consistent, but the people show these wonderful young people consistently putting their bodies on the line, constantly raising the questions, even though guns are put on them. And in fact, the extra police presence actually is what causes the violence. They agitate and aggravate and exacerbate the situation by being there in their riot gear and giving the level of abuse that is happening to the people. And so there are several sectors organizing. There's large coalition. There's a large local and national coalition. And so we are in a situation whereby there are significant forms of social movement at work, and that those various levels of organizing are coalescing.
Now, as that happens, I know that you're there representing, among other things, the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And how do we advance the spirit of reconciliation? I mean, it is, I struggle to put myself in the mindset of the policeman who climbs into the armored vehicle or points the gun at peaceful protesters or journalists and threatens them and curses them out. I mean, how do we reconcile? Are they driven by fear? Are they driven by anger? Is it all of the above? And is it really even our responsibility to be concerned about their side of the equation?
Well, I am by no means willing to, or have the capacity to, rather, enter into the mind of someone pointing an M16 at a 16-year-old. I don't understand it. But I do know that there is a tradition of people who have resisted it. And I think the jump toward reconciliation and peace is often what is articulated, particularly by religious creatures, but not doing the hard work of justice. Darren Wilson needs to be he needs to be indicted and convicted. There needs to be a demilitarization of the police. There needs to be a civilian review board of policing agencies. And so, and this is in part the demands that the Hands Up Coalition is calling for here in Ferguson and the St. Louis area. And so, and that will only happen, that would not happen without a pitched battle, a pitched struggle for justice. Non-violently, at their minimum, they have more guns than we do. And then ethically, we don't want to repeat that kind of cycle of violence, which is with the police and the policing agencies are continually going. And then one of the shameful things about the visit of Attorney Eric Holder and the president, by extension, is his celebration of Ron Johnson's increased militarization upon children in Ferguson. It was quite shameful, and this may prove to be Obama's Hurricane Katrina.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because in the opener to the show, I pointed out that people were outraged that the president went golfing after the kidnap and murder of the journalist by ISIS, which certainly was a tragic and awful and horrible thing. But I found it incongruous that nobody was talking about the president or anyone else going golfing while we had American children being confronted by a militarized police force on the streets of an American city.
Well, I mean, that has everything to do with, we pray for the dear brother journalist's family and the tragedy of that loss and the attack upon the free press by ISIS, but also there's an attack on the free press here in the United States. And that I pray that the emphasis on this of the death of our dear brother Foley, I believe is his name, that this is beheading of him on television and all of that is what warranted the kind of attention that has gotten versus the fact that if it is black bodies that are being politically decapitated and existentially kidnapped, that those black bodies don't carry the same amount. But I'm pretty sure the parents of Brother Foley understand that fully, that the preciousness of their son is the same preciousness that Leslie McPadden holds for her children.
Well, I'm so glad you said that because I think that may be a way to carry them for me to carry the message, to point out that horror and that grief that so many people feel in a situation like poor Mr. Foley, that tragic situation. Now imagine that happening every other day, or more frequently to a young person, much younger perhaps than even than Mr. Foley. And perhaps you can get a sense of the grief that people are experiencing because I think it's a breaking down of that otherness, that sense that this is happening to somebody else. So I guess I know you have to go, and I'm certainly concerned about you making sure to rest that back of you too. But after that injury, but you have any final thoughts for us before we let you go back to your good work there?
Well, we pray that your listeners will engage in critical analysis, that they will pay attention to what independent media is having to say, that they will not demonize poor black children. We ask that people be continually put pressure on through social media and other forms of communication, that we need Officer Wilson to be indicted and prayerfully convicted as a form of justice for this community, and that we will continue to articulate a vision of the world, that the promise of democracy was not lost outside the Canfield apartment with the brutal murder of Mike Brown.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Again, all our prayers and thoughts go with you and your health problem, and thank you for all the good work you're doing down there. We've been talking with Reverend Osagyefo Sekou there on the ground in Ferguson. Thanks so much for joining us.